Guys, welcome to News Reporting and Writing Online. Today I am going to be going over a PowerPoint with you, but first I wanted to take the time just to mention kind of some of what has changed in the class, so you'll be ready for that. And just so you know, there is a revised schedule on Folio under content and under where syllabus is. So it says syllabus and revised schedule, so you can get a sense of what we're doing when. I haven't moved a whole lot except to obviously move a week forward from the week we missed. So not a whole lot has changed, but obviously we'll be doing the lectures online, so that's one thing. We're going to be doing a reflection exercise near the end of the semester having to do with journalism and its place in society, and it's essentially a way for me to make up some points for you guys because I've taken out the multimedia on your stories. So if for any reason you're not up to date on kind of where we are with the number story, look back in your email, look for the email from me, or look at the requirements that are on Folio. I have changed some of those requirements. And we're also going to change some stuff for the final story. The final story was originally going to be you going to a government meeting and observing it and then interviewing people. Obviously that's not going to happen right now. And as far as I can tell, Statesboro is doing teleconference meetings, and so is Savannah. The one group that I don't know if they've met again yet, I'm kind of keeping an eye on it, but I think we might be able to do an observation of, is the school board, the Bullitt County School Board, because they have their meetings online. So I can have you guys watch a meeting. So I'm kind of waiting to see what happens with that before I make that final assignment. But your final story will be something that'll be a little different than kind of what we had expected, but it'll work out fine. Okay, so for today, this lecture is a couple of things. First, it's just going over some math terms and ideas that you probably are familiar with, but maybe hadn't thought of that you might use in your number story. And then also going over infographics and kind of what those are and how to do them. So let's get started with our terms here. First, talking about proportion and comparison. If we're going to talk about giving a number some kind of context, a lot of times that's necessary. So for example, I've got here, what is the sales tax in Bullitt County as opposed to other counties in Georgia? That's basically giving some comparison or giving some context to the information you have. Because sometimes a number is just a number and it doesn't mean anything otherwise. Also, per capita is another way to report numbers that's useful, and basically that's saying per individual. So you talk about the issue in terms of how many people, how it affected an individual person. So for example, a 2.5 in-state tuition increase, I think means roughly about $1,000 for you guys, if I'm remembering that number correctly. But in any case, the idea is you would take a what one person would pay for something, say it's taxes or something like that, and have that kind of translate to the larger group. We talked about percent in a previous class, and basically I just think percent is useful because it makes plain numbers more understandable. So here is kind of the formula for doing percent, if you didn't know that, but you can also always use an online calculator for that, just FYI. Of course, it's useful to know percent because you have to do tips and things like that, so you need to know how to get 20% out of most things. If that's what y'all are tipping these days, I don't know. Okay, percent change. This is one that you probably aren't as familiar with. Basically, this is saying what is the percent of change between one thing and the other. So you're able to figure this out by subtracting the initial value of the thing from the changed value and dividing it by the initial value. Then you multiply that value by 100. So if we want to find the percent change from $20 to $35, we would subtract 20 from 35, get 15, divide that by the number 20 by the change, right? No, divide by initial value, I'm sorry, and then you've got 0.75 times 100 is 75%. So if you want to say if something has changed from one thing to the next, I mean, maybe you're talking about like reduced, prices have reduced, or sales or anything like that, then you can use this percent change calculation. Average versus median. Average, you guys know this one, it's all the amounts added together and divided by the total number. So in this case, I've added these four numbers together. I'm going to divide them by the fact that there are four, And oops, and what should I get here? Let's see, 25 by 4 is actually not that easy. Why did I put that up there for myself? I don't know. All right, we're gonna let that one just keep on going. But you guys get the idea of what it averages. A median is the middle number in a series of sequential numbers. So it's not the middle number in terms of average, it's the actual physical middle number. So in this sequence I've got at the bottom, the median is 5 because it's the middle number. Now, if there are an equal number of values of numbers, then you have to do something else, right? Because you can't just say 5 and 10, you need one number. So what do? You take the average of those two numbers, okay? You take the average of the two numbers that are in the middle, and that gives you the median. And I'm going to show you in just a second how this is useful. So this is what I was going to show you guys. So let's say you're reporting on a company that has 7 employees, and you get all of their salaries, right? Like we just looked up salaries recently for professors. You get all these numbers, and you decide that you want to report on what the average person is making. So do you use an average or do you use a median? The average salaries of the 7 employees is $51,000. But look back at these numbers real quick. Does that look like what people are making on average? No, because the number of the average misrepresents the overall amount. The median salary of the 7 employees is $23,000. Now, does that look like it fits? It looks a lot more, what you're expected the average employee at this company to make. So that's a difference of $28,857. So that's a pretty big difference. If you're going to be reporting on this and that company tells you, oh, our average wage is $51,000, then they're not lying to you. But as a journalist, you need to know enough to look at the numbers and say, well, really the median is what we need to report here, not the average. I just want to mention that there are a lot of online tools for all kinds of different things. This is an inflation calculator. There's also online calculators for just about anything you need. So obviously, if you're looking to do something and manipulate your numbers in a certain way, it's out there. There's even one for beer on here, I think. Yeah, there's one for butter too. So yeah, you can calculate whatever you want. All right, infographics. So I'm going to be upfront with you guys. Part of the reason I put infographics in here originally was because your multimedia for your number story, I was going to let you do an infographic. Obviously, you don't have your multimedia that you're required to do anymore, but I still think it's worth taking a few minutes to look at infographics. But if you're stressed out right now and you've got a ton of other stuff to do, you can skip this. Just go ahead and go about your day. I'm not going to know either way. But we'll go ahead and talk about it because it is a useful thing to know, and I think kind of a fun thing to know, how we visually represent things. So let's start with talking about what an infographic is. It's a visual representation of numbers. I think that sounds so easy and straightforward, but a lot of people get this wrong. Okay, the table you see or the image you see in front of you basically breaks something down and tells you a story, right? It tells you what's happened with young drivers involved in vehicle crashes. Now, this next one I'm going to show you is what some people would think of as an infographic, but it's really a series of icons being used. There's nothing on this, image that represents a number. Like, let me go back real quick. Visual representation of numbers. So there's nothing here that visually represents and tells us what the number is. In this case, again, here's a statistic. This is an image. This is not an infographic. It doesn't visually represent this number. It doesn't actually, this tree doesn't tell us 2,636 trees, okay? But if I take and do a comparison, which by the way, these numbers are made up, I totally made them up, no idea if they're accurate at all, but we needed some numbers. So if we do a comparison and say, this tree represents this number, and this tree represents this number, and this number happens to be half of that, guess what? This is half the size of that. So that's a visual representation of a number. The visual is supposed to tell you something about the number, okay? Hope that makes sense. Sometimes that's a little bit of a tricky one. So basically, if you're going to make an infographic, you want to start with your numbers. You want to choose a form of representation, so what type of chart or bar graph or image are you going to use? Select your method of design, meaning what kind of software are you going to use? And use contrasting colors to make it easy for people to actually see what is being portrayed. So here's an example of a pie graph, and this is something that you guys, I'm sure, have done for different projects. One good hard rule about a pie graph is that you should never have more than 5 things in it. So as you can see, this one has, this one has 5 things in it, exactly. And it's just at the point of like, it's almost too much, but not quite. So that's where, if you're working on a pie graph, you need more than one thing, but you don't need more than 5 things. So that's good to remember. And they're using really strong contrasting colors. Now in this case, we're looking at a bar graph. And this is just a traditional bar graph, and this is an infographic. This is, what tells you what a visual representation of the numbers, what something is in terms of numbers. Same thing here. We've got icons, we've got people, 6 out of 10, and they're shaded, and that tells us what number we're looking at. I like this one because it's really easy at a glance. You can just immediately know it has something to do with education. And instead of bars, they've got pencils, so that's kind of clever. One thing you don't want to do with infographics is rely heavily on text. You don't want to have a ton of text. So what I'm showing you right now is not an infographic. Nothing's visually represented. It's just images and text. So be aware of that. When you think about your method of design, there's a lot of different software you can use. I didn't put on here Excel and Word. Well, I put on here Word, but I didn't put on here Excel. So InDesign, Photoshop, Canva, there's a lot of different design options out there. It just depends on your kind of level of comfort. So I put some infographics in here. I was going to have you guys, say whether or not you thought they were good. Obviously, that's not happening. So I'm going to tell you whether or not I thought they were good. This one right here does a good job with contrast. You can actually see the colors really well, but it needs more information. We need a little bit more to know what's going on. This one right here, I'll give you guys a second to look at it, see if you can tell what's wrong with it. Have you spotted the numbers yet, or what the problem with the numbers is? Basically, it adds up to more than 100. It adds up to more than 100, 100 and 240 something, basically, if I can do math in my head. Oops. Okay, here's an example of an infographic that I like because it tells a lot, but sometimes the students don't like it because they feel like it's too much, it's too hard to see. But basically, it's telling you men versus women in movie dialogue in Disney movies. So who has the most dialogue? And it's got the different movies and then the percent that it's male. You can see Mighty Joe Young and Pocahontas have more pink for the female. So I think this is one that has a lot of information in it. It may be a little overwhelming, but it still is good. This one, if you're looking at this, you might initially be like, yeah, that's an infographic. There's an infographic there. And yeah, there's a representation of numbers here, but usually a bar chart has more than one bar. And just a picture of people doesn't tell us anything. This tells us something. It's not an infographic, but it's not a very good one. Let's put it that way. Here's one that is just bad. This is so confusing. It's about bankruptcies, but it's got ships on it. And the way that this is set up with all the different values, it seems like this should be increasing values in money, but instead it's in time. It's just very, very confusing. This one is very plain, and it works really well. So you might be seeing a trend here in terms of the plain infographic works very well, and they've even got their source down here saying where the information came from. That's helpful. This one, you can tell me what you think of it. Initially, it looks kind of cool. But part of what bothers me about it is that it's hard to tell what goes with what. This goes with that number, and this red goes with that number. But you have to really, work your way around to get what goes with what. So I think that's not a good design. All right, this is the last one. This is one of my favorite infographics. It doesn't at all look like a traditional infographic. But what it is it's Halloween candy, how much you can eat for 100 calories. So this is how much you can eat of a Milky Way. This is how much you can eat of a Butterfinger. So useful stuff here, I think fun information, helps to make a good infographic. All right, so that's it for this week. I will see you guys, or not for this week, for this lecture. I'll see you guys at the next lecture, which is about sunshine law. Take care.